Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're continuing on in Unit 2 with our discussion of population numbers. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about some statistics that we need to look at if we're going to measure and understand the population and the population growth of a country. And so we're going to be looking at a lot of data and statistics and numbers. And what we're going to see is how each of these particular numbers and pieces of data can help us to better understand not just the population of the country, but also the other things that are happening in that country as well, and also some of the things that we can assume about a country based upon some of these numbers. So I'm just going to go ahead and click through all of these so that you can see them, and I'll briefly tell you the name of them, and then or what the letters stand for, and then we'll go on and talk about a few of them. I will probably split this up into a video or two. So the first one is CBR, or crude birth rate. The second one is CDR, or crude death rate. Third one is infant mortality rate. Obviously you can see out there life expectancy, fecundity, general fertility rate, total fertility rate, and rate of natural increase. Each of these numbers is going to tell us something different. And again, based upon what it is, we can kind of gain an understanding of that country and what's going on there. So the first one we're going to talk about is CDR, or crude death rate. Obviously, this is going to be dealing with the deaths in a country. And so the way that we get the statistic is we look at the total number of deaths per 1,000 people in a country per year. And one of the things that when we look at this particular statistic, of course, people can die from a whole range of things. But typically, if you look at the less developed countries, the people that you're looking at, they're going to be dying, tend to be some of your younger generation, and a lot of that has to do with the medical technology that is not available in those countries, but also the lack of sanitation, things like clean drinking water, understanding of sanitation and how disease and germs are spread, things along those lines. You can see there the numbers typically within a less developed country, and some people might not like the way that that's grouped, but that's fine with me. We're just kind of using some general categories. In less developed countries, it's typically going to be a number somewhere between the range of 25 and 40, and then in more developed countries, somewhere in the range between 5 and 12. And what we see is that obviously people are dying in all countries, but generally speaking, your younger people are going to be dying in less developed countries, whereas in more developed countries, the people who are going to be dying at higher rates are going to be the elderly. One of the things I always tell my students is that people always die. There's really nothing that you can do to stop death. And so it just depends on which side of the spectrum that people are dying. And so obviously in more developed countries, we've developed not only better methods in terms of sanitation, delivering clean drinking water, clean food. We have appropriate medication for people in case they do get sick. I think this Ebola virus outbreak in West Africa and bringing people to we've had the American doctors who were brought back to the city of Atlanta to be treated at Emory Healthcare. I think it's a great example of the disparity really in understanding of medical treatment and the availability of medical treatment across different parts of the world. And so again, crude death rate, and people are obviously always dying, and so it's just a matter of what they're dying of. And so depending on that number, we can probably tell whether or not it's a more developed country or less developed country. And then we have crude birth rate, and this is going to be looking at the number of live births per 1,000 people per year. Now, very similarly, in less developed countries, we tend to find higher numbers, and a lot of that has to do with the type of lifestyle that people are living in less developed countries. In less developed countries, people tend to be living a more agrarian lifestyle, working in some type of primary economic activity, and typically in agrarian less developed countries and lifestyles, people tend to have more children so that those children can then help the parents work, grow the farm, things along those lines, but also because of the anticipation of children dying. Now, one of the things we'll talk about later on is how medical technology has allowed for those children to survive, and that's actually what causes a initial rise in population in less developed countries. And then the opposite is true for more developed countries. People tend to have fewer children. A lot of that has to do with lifestyle choices. Women going off and getting careers, not getting married as young. Children becoming much more expensive to raise and to deal with. But again, we'll get into more of that when we get into our when we talk about the demographic transition model. Now, if we look here, this is a graph pulled off of a website called gapminder.org. It's a great resource and tool developed by a man by the name of Hans Rosling. It's a fantastic website for you to go and check out. And one of the things I like to do is I like to look at, generally speaking, if we talk about development and the rates that we're talking about here. Now, what I'm going to use for my statistic on development, obviously this is not a perfect correlation because income per person does not necessarily indicate to us level of development, but it kind of goes along those lines. Typically, the more income per person or GDP per capita you have per person, the more developed the country is going to be. And so if you look here on our vertical axis, we have the crude birth rate. On our horizontal axis, we have the income per person. You'll notice that as the income per person increases across the world, the fewer children are being had. Now notice how also we have groupings of region, a general grouping of regions. You have your sub-Saharan African countries, you have your North African countries, and some of your Asian countries. You have some of your European countries, and then also your Western North American countries kind of down here at the bottom. So there's this nice slope and very strong correlation between level of development and a number of children, or sorry, not number of children, but crude birth rate. The next statistic we're going to look at is the infant mortality rate. Now, when we talk about infant mortality rate, we're looking at the number of infant deaths per 1,000 live births in a population. And obviously, what we're going to see is that we're going to tend to have higher infant mortality rate. We're going to have a higher infant mortality rate in less developed countries, and a lot of that has to do with, again, a woman's inability to get proper treatment, whether they're just not able to access the hospital, or the hospital isn't available, or they can't afford the hospital. And again, in more developed countries, we tend to have lower infant mortality rates because of the fact that women are able to get better care in terms of the prenatal care while the child is still in the womb, and then the postnatal care after the baby is born and in the hospital, and those types of things. And again, we see a very strong correlation there between level of development and infant mortality rates. Now, this isn't perfectly lined up with infant mortality rates. This is children 1 to 59 months, so that's almost 5 years old. But anyway, it still kind of gives you an idea of how what high rates of young people are dying in some of these less developed countries. If you look here, you have Democratic Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, all the way up here in your upper left-hand corner, over 100, and then as far down here as Denmark, down here below 2, the United States somewhere here between 3 and 4, and so obviously there's a very wide disparity. And a lot of this has to do with once the child is born, keeping that child healthy away from disease. Obviously, young children and babies are highly susceptible to disease and bacteria and viruses, haven't developed an immune system, things along those lines. And so again, development is really gonna play a large role in the particular numbers that we're looking at here. The next two statistics we're going to look at, first we're just going to look at life expectancy, and then I'm going to talk to you for a second about fecundity, and then we'll go ahead and end the video there. So the next one, life expectancy, I would think is fairly self-explanatory. Basically, it's just talking about the average lifespan a person can expect to live if they're born in a particular country. And obviously, in more developed countries, we would tend to see people who are living longer. Now, one of the things that we've seen, and this has happened over the past 50 to 60 years or so, is really the whole world has increased its life expectancy. And a lot of that has to do with increased food supply, improved medical technology, and the spread of medical technology to other parts of the world. But you can see there, typically, if you're in a less developed country, you're not going to live to 70. Most life expectancy is going to be less than 70. If you really split it into gender, you also get some different numbers there. And then more developed countries, we start seeing people living over 75. Fecundity is going to be the number of years a woman is able to conceive and bear children. And typically, we rate this between the years of 15 and 45. Typically, these are going to be the years that are safe for a woman to bear children. Now 15 you might say seems pretty young, but in some countries in the world 15 is not all that young. In fact, women might be having children even younger than that, just depending on the social circumstances of that particular country. So again, we'll look at this particular chart. And this is probably one of the more amazing things if you look at global development, if you look at global population statistics and development. Notice how, these are 2000 figures, so these are a little bit old, but in 2000, some of the least developed countries of the world had a life expectancy of over 40, and really, prior to the Industrial Revolution, a life expectancy over 40, that was to have an average life expectancy over 40. That was pretty darn good. But you notice how almost the entire world is beginning to shift up into this upper right-hand corner, what Hans Rosling calls the healthy and wealthy, and you almost have a flat line here from China on over, very close to kind of a flat line. And so these kind of statistics really are very encouraging as we look at the global population, the global health. Now, some people might say this is kind of frightening because as people live longer, we're going to see an increased burden on governments and populations as populations try to figure out how to take care of larger populations of the elderly, things along those lines. So anyway, incredibly encouraging, but also kind of concerning all at the same time. So we'll go ahead and end the video right there. We'll continue on with our other population numbers in our next video.